set out on a narrow way many years ago, hoping I would find true love along the broken road.
But I got lost a time or two, wiped my brow and kept pushing through. I couldn't see how every sign pointed straight to you.
That every long lost dream led me to where you are. Others who broke my heart, they were like northern stars, pointing me on my way into your loving arms. This much I know is true, that God bless the broken road that led me straight to you.
I think about the years I spent just passing through. I'd like to have the time I lost and give it back to you.
But you just smiled.
The meeting place. Where did you meet your husband? Where did you meet your wife? Do you know? Do you remember? Do you remember that first time, that first place you met? How about your parents? Do you know where they met for the first time? I met my wife for the first time at Bluefield College. We were students in the 70s, and we met there. Wasn't a whole lot of meeting places then. Now there's all kinds of places that you can meet people. My parents were born and raised in Crupperneck many years ago. Now Crupperneck was a rural community. It was spread out. A lot of people don't know this, but I know this. There were two parts to Crupperneck. There was the lower Crupperneck, and there was the upper Crupperneck. My mother lived in the lower Crupperneck region. She lived close to the Golly River. You drove down the road, and you'd come to a beautiful pond. They had the most beautiful pond I've ever seen. It was crystal clear. They washed their clothes out in that pond. Drive a little farther and you would notice their driveway. A big framed house, two-story framed house with a long porch on the front. Two maple trees set in front of the house. They had to pump their water. They had a pump around back, but they pumped their water. I don't remember a television in their house, and I don't remember a telephone. The only way they communicated with other people is they would walk to their homes. Wasn't too many houses around their house. I just remember two. One was the Beavers that lived out the road. Another was the Trescotts. I remember the Beavers. I remember Cease Beaver. He would walk up the road maybe 2 or 3 times a week, and he'd have a big white sack he was carrying. And he had a cigar in his mouth, but it was never lit. He just chewed on the cigar. He was walking to the main road, which was maybe 3 miles away. He'd walk to the main road, and he would hitchhike to Richwood. He would go to Richwood, and he would sell eggs to the merchants of Richwood. After he was finished, he would hitchhike back home. I remember Cease Beaver. My father lived in Upper Crupperneck. Upper Crupperneck was up on top of a hill. You drove to the top of the hill, and you drive as far as you could on pavement. When the pavement ran out, it was a dirt road. You drove up the top of the hill on the dirt road, and right on the top of the hill was my father's home place. You drive in the driveway there, and there'd be a big garden on the right. On the left, there was a woodshed they heated with wood. Neighbors were quite a distance away. Ellie Brown lived behind them, maybe a half a mile. That's where they were born and raised. I do remember a TV at my father's house, and I remember a telephone, but the telephone was only used for emergencies. I don't remember anybody on the telephone. That's where they grew up, in that community. In the center of the community, the center of life, was a Chestnut Flat church. On Sundays, everybody would gather at the Chestnut Flat church. And they would stay there for hours, because that was the only time they got to see each other. They heard a sermon. My grandfather was a preacher. They heard a sermon, and the church was full. In the spring and summer, there were so many people there that they raised the windows to hear. They would open the front doors, and they would stand out in front to listen to him preach. I remember they had gas lamps. They didn't have no electricity in the church. They had gas lamps. And they didn't have inside facilities, if you catch my drift. They had an outhouse, and there was always a big line to the outhouse. Lots of Sundays they had dinner on the grounds. That's where everybody gathered. That's where you met people. That's where you worshiped. That's where you sang. That's where my dad met my mother. That's where they accepted Jesus Christ in their life. That's where they were baptized. That's where they were married. That was the meeting place. The church was the center of the community, the center of life. It was the meeting place. Jesus tells a parable. He tells a parable of a man who owned a large vineyard. And in the center of that vineyard was a fig tree, right in the center. And in my mind, that's where people gather, in the center of the vineyard. And he was walking in his vineyard one day, and he walked up to the fig tree, and he looked at the fig tree, and there were no figs on it. He got hold of the gardener, and he brought him, and he said, "Look at that tree." He said, "I've been passing that tree for 3 years, and I have not got one fig off of that tree." And he looks at the gardener, and what does he say? He says, "Cut it down. Get rid of it." Even though it's in the center of the garden. Even though it's where some people gather and meet. Cut it down. And the gardener says, "Let's do this. Let me take care of the fig tree for a year. Let me water it. Let me trim it. Let me fertilize it. Let me pull the weeds out from it. And in a year, if it does not bear fruit, then we'll cut it down." To me, that fig tree in our day and time, what is that symbolic of? To me, it's symbolic of the church. It's symbolic of the church. You know, churches need support. They need care. They need attendance. They need prayer. They need to become the center of the community again, where people can gather and they can meet. You know, thinking back on Cruppernick, you've heard a lot about Cruppernick. I remember one fella said, "I just made that up in my mind. There's not really a Cruppernick." Well, there really is. But you know, if you drove into Crupperneck this day and time and you drove down that lower Crupperneck Road where my mother used to live, the house is not there. It's not there because nobody took care of it. If you go to where my father lived and drive out that road, you wouldn't see anything that I've described because nobody took care of it. If you drive to the center of the community, if you drive to the center of the community, the Chestnut Flat Church is still there. It still stands. And you know, I was looking online to get a picture of the Chestnut Flat Church. And you know what I discovered? They are remodeling the inside of the Chestnut Flat Church. They are working on the outside of the grounds of the Chestnut Flat Church. They are restoring the Chestnut Flat Church. It is not Chestnut Flat United Methodist Church. It is not Chestnut Flat Methodist Church. It is Chestnut Flat Church. And you know what else I discovered? As I was looking at the pictures of the church, I came upon a picture, a video, and I punched it. And you know what I saw? I saw an online service. They are having services now at the Chestnut Flat Church. And I watched the pastor, I watched him kneel down, and I watched him have the children to hold hands and pray. You know what? Don't give up hope on the church, because the church can still be the center of the community. It can still be the center of life. Don't give up on the church. That's sort of a resurrection story of the church in Crupperneck. Not only is there a Crupperneck, but now there is an active Chestnut Flat Church in Crupperneck.
I set out on a narrow way many years ago, hoping I would find true love along the broken road.
But I got lost a time or two, wiped my brow and kept pushing through. I couldn't see how every sign pointed straight to you.
That every long lost dream led me to where